Welcome to the Garden Angelus, where we talk about flowers, veggies, and all the best dirt. I'm Carol Michael from Indianapolis, Indiana.
And I'm Dee Nash from Guthrie, Oklahoma. We call ourselves Garden Angelists because we are evangelists for gardening. We love gardening and we want you to love it too.
Yes, we do. We are also authors and invite you to check out our books, including my books, Potted and Pruned, Homegrown and Handpicked, and Seeded and Sodded, my trilogy of gardening humor, and my new book, Creatures and Critters, Who's in My Garden?
And my book, The 20-30-something Garden Guide, and No Fuss, Down and Dirty, Gardening 101, for anyone who wants to grow stuff. You can ask for any of our books at your favorite bookstore. You'll probably have to get them in your car or find them online wherever books are sold.
And speaking of online, you can also find us as the Garden Angelus on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and sometimes Pinterest. And we'd love for you to join our Facebook group, the Garden Angelus Garden Club.
Now, on to this week's episode.
Hi, Dee.
Hello, Carol. I have some business. Want to hear it?
You know I do.
We got a shout out on Penn Live Patriot News this week, and I was thrilled. I know you're thrilled. I'm going to share it in our notes, but I thought I'd talk about it on here. They did a whole roundup of virtual garden tours, talks, and videos to get you through the coronavirus shutdown. And this was written by George Weigel, special to Penn Live. Did you ever think George Weigel would write about us?
Well, George Weigel has written about my books before, so I know him virtually. Nice guy.
Oh, well, cool. I'm so excited. Anyway, he gives us a great roundup of all kinds of things that gardeners can do and see online so that they don't watch the news 24/7 during the coronavirus outbreak.
Right. And I shared that link on the Garden Angelus Garden Club Facebook group.
Great.
So that everybody could enjoy it, because there is a lot of good info there.
There is.
A lot of fun sites to visit.
There are. So do you have a quote for us this week?
Well, you came up with this quote, and I really do like it.
You can read it.
I am going to try to pay attention to the spring. I'm going to look around at all the flowers and look up at the hectic trees. I'm going to close my eyes and listen. Anne Lamont.
One of my very favorite writers. She is a beautiful writer. And I think right now we need to go outside, even if it's just our own backyards, because I know some places parks have been closed. And we need to just look at the flowers, at the hectic trees, and then we need to look at the sky and close our eyes later and just be.
Exactly. And so I have spent a lot of time in my garden.
Me too.
And I have some of our flower this week, which is the iris.
Yes, it's the National Garden Bureau's Year of the Iris this year. And so when people talk about irises, they think of bearded irises most often because they've been in gardens forever because it's a stalwart plant.
It is. And I have a bearded iris. I just have one little patch of it, and it's kind of getting overtaken by some lilacs. So as I was kind of weeding and fluffing up on that side of the house, I thought, I need to move those. But the time to move them is July, not now.
Yeah, they like to be moved when they're dormant.
Exactly.
That's a good time to move them. And you do not want to plant them too deep, and they do not want too much water because they will rot. That's bearded irises. I will say this, once you have them in an area, unless they get taken over by a lilac or something else, like Goldsturm rudbeckia, they're pretty stalwart. I mean, it is hard to kill them.
It is. They do suffer from iris borers sometimes. And if you get those, then you kind of have to dig that patch up and sanitize it and replant the clumps that don't have the iris borer in them. But that's so yucky, I don't want to talk about it.
They also get it. I mean, we have to talk about one more yucky thing. Are you ready?
Blah. Go ahead.
They have leaf spot sometimes. It's a common disease. It's caused by the fungus Dittamelina macrospora. Did you like how I said that?
I am so impressed.
So you'll see yellow-brown spots on the leaves, and sometimes that's in an area that has too much water. So you want to put them in an area that is really dry. And so they turn brown and they dry, and I see it occasionally when we get a lot of rain in the spring. I'll be honest, I don't do anything about it except for try to keep them dry.
Right. And just so that I can impress with my pronunciation, they are in the Iridaceae family.
Is Iridaceae iris family?
Yes.
I thought so. And are the other irises, the other varieties iris, in that same family, or have taxonomists decided through DNA testing they're going to move them?
Well, since I did not look this up, I'm going to say that they are in that family until somebody tells me they're not, and I don't think our listeners are going to care.
Nobody cares, really. So there are beardless ones, beardless irises, and one of those is the Dutch iris. And about, I'd say 15 years ago, I planted some Dutch iris. I want to say they were bulbs. That makes sense, instead of rhizomes?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I planted some bulbs, and they have started to bloom now after 15 years. And I'll get like 2 blooms, and then they they're great, and they're beautiful, and they're getting ready to bloom right now. What do you know? They don't take up hardly any room, so they aren't bothering a thing.
And the beardless iris, believe it or not, can tolerate very damp conditions.
Yeah, this area is kind of damp, so I can see that.
And some of the most famous ones, I'm going to lump them into a group, and I'm going to call them the Louisiana irises.
Yes.
I know down in Louisiana at Longview House and Garden that I visited in March of last year, in April, they always have Louisiana Iris Day because they have an extensive collection of irises planted.
But this year,
no one's seeing it this year except the caretaker.
It's canceled this year. But maybe they're taking pictures and putting it on their website. I know other botanical gardens are doing that. So, a lot of places are doing that. And we also need to remember that if we're part of a botanic garden, or like I'm a member of the Tulsa Botanic Garden, for example, I go ahead and pay for my membership every year because they still have to water those plants. They still have to do what they have to do. So we need to remember them just like we remember everybody else.
Right. The other thing I want to say about the beardless irises is, again, I've got some that are kind of gotten taken over by this time of viburnum. So I think I can lift and plant those anytime. And so I'm going to lift those up and replant those someplace else, probably this week.
Are those your reticulated irises, or are they another?
No, these are beardless irises.
Oh, beardless irises. Okay, well.
Yes.
All right, so you want to talk about Iris reticulata now?
Iris reticulata is my absolute favorite irises. They bloom in early spring. Mine have all bloomed out, and they're just leaves now. And once again, this is like a theme this week. Some of the reticulated irises were planted around the base of a large spruce on the corner of my house. As the spruce got bigger, they're kind of struggling under the limbs. Mm-hmm. So I thought, I'm just going to lift and dig those up and plant those someplace else. So if they make it, fine. If they don't make it, that's fine. They weren't going to do much where they were anyway.
And they're pretty cheap. I mean, you can buy them cheap. So I have a question for you. When you say lift them up and move them, are you going to try to lift them up as a group since they're not crowded themselves, and take them with their dirt and everything and try to convince them they haven't been moved? Or are you going to lift them out and shake off the dirt? Which way are you going to do?
I'm going to lift them up and shake out the dirt because they have bloomed already. So I consider this sort of what I call moving in the green.
Right.
And I'm just going to lift them and move them. I did that with some daffodils the other day that ended up in the lawn. That's a long story.
Mine do,
but
too. I have some in the lawn, in the front lawn.
This was kind of, there used to be, never mind. But anyway, I dug them all out, and then I planted them where I'm going to have a row of daffodils by the vegetable garden. So you can dig and divide daffodils in the green once they're done blooming.
Right. And in fact, but one thing I'll say about daffodils is you have to dig a big old deep hole sometimes, because daffodils seem to like burrow down as they grow. And they just get deeper and deeper and deeper. Because one time, and we've talked about this before, one time at an abandoned nursery, I went and dug up some daffodils, and that was the hardest digging I had ever done. So, but I still have those daffodils because they last forever. So you can also move in the green right now. I know this isn't about irises, but as long as we're talking about this topic, hellebore seedlings. This is a really good... Really good time.
It
to
is an
move
excellent
them.
time.
Yeah.
And I moved one a couple of weeks ago that it's just like, that's not in the right spot. And so I dug up a small hellebore and just moved it. And it seems quite happy.
Yeah, they don't care. And I had a bunch of mine mix in the very front bed where they're doing splendidly. And so I took some of their children and I moved them over into my long border in front of my house to go underneath a hydrangea. Now, when the guys came and replaced logs last week, they trampled some of them. But you know what? Hellebores are tough, as are irises, to take us back to irises. I'm going to tell you one thing that I find. And by the way, I grow Iris reticulata too. I finally found a spot they really love, and they're happy there, and I've had them come back for 3 years. Sometimes in Oklahoma, they don't want to come back. But bearded irises, the ones most people are familiar with, here's my problem with them. In Oklahoma, they bloom at the exact moment that the rains come. They're kind of like peonies. And they bloom and then they all fall over. So if your irises are blooming wherever you are and you're getting ready to have a big old rainstorm, just cut them and bring them inside as cut flowers.
Right. And you'll discover that the bearded iris is heavily scented.
Yes, it will make you sneeze maybe. So put them not right by your chair.
So let's go through this really quick. So if you're going to buy bearded irises, often they are sold as a potted plant in the garden center. And you can buy them and plant them at that time. Dig and divide those.
Here they're also sold bare root in summer.
Yeah.
Middle of summer.
Yeah.
But go ahead.
Yeah, sometimes you can find them bare root middle of summer. The beardless irises, sometimes you can buy those as bulbs. And Iris reticulata, you always buy those as bulbs. And those bulbs are fall planted.
Okay. Works for me.
All right. I'm ready for the next quote.
Gardening is like everything else in life. You get out of it as much as you put in. No one can make a garden by buying a few packets of seeds or doing an afternoon's weeding. You must love it, and then your love will be repaid 1,000-fold, as every gardener knows. That's by Margery Fish.
I love that quote.
We love her book, and we're going to talk about it more in a minute. Margery Fish, she's one of my heroes.
Yes. And so what she says is true about a few packets of seed does not a gardener make. And I hope all the seeds that are getting purchased because of the coronavirus, that people understand that it takes a bit more than just throwing the seed packet out there and hoping for the best. It's going to take a little bit more. And if anybody has any questions, there are so many resources online right now. But of course, you can ask me, you can ask Dee. Dee's got a great book, the 20-30-something guide, garden guide. Mm-hmm. That would be useful. But anyway, the vegetable we chose is definitely not one that you throw out a few seeds and you get it.
But it's one that people often want to grow when they're brand new.
Right.
Because most people love this vegetable. It's asparagus.
Not a big lover of asparagus, so I've never really thought, I need to grow asparagus.
I have had 2 different asparagus beds, and I will say this, wherever you want to put them, you better want them to stay there because they will last in that bed about 15 years. And it's a time investment. So, when you buy those crowns that you're going to put in the ground, you need a well-prepared area that is free of grass. And you plant them, and then you have to wait 2 or 3 years for them to get big enough to make you asparagus spears.
Right. And
I love fresh asparagus in the garden.
And that's what we want to tell people is asparagus is a perennial vegetable. So you plant it once, and like rhubarb or horseradish, it's there for a long, long time.
Yeah, 15, 20 years. And there are lots of new varieties on the market, and so I would buy one of the more modern varieties of asparagus because they've developed ways for them to perform quicker. You don't want to start doing spheres. You don't want to start getting spears, breaking them off and bringing them in to cook or eat in the garden, for that matter, until they're about a pencil-sized or bigger. Really, I would say finger size.
Yeah, the ones you pick to eat, they need to be finger size or about the size you would see in the grocery store. And you can keep snapping them off in the spring But
until they get small.
until you get to the pencil size, and then leave the pencil size alone. They need to grow on to bulk the plant up for the next year.
But here's the deal. Once you've had it in 2 to 3 years, your first ones will be bigger, and then you will probably eat those pencil-sized ones. But eventually, it grows so fast that you can't snap them off. You know what I mean? It goes right into fern. I mean, as soon as it starts to get warm, it's ready to do its flowering section.
Right. And the minute you see leaves starting to form on the spear, it's no good to eat. Don't even bother.
It'll be pithy and gross. A couple of other things about asparagus. It does need fertilization. A lot of people use different types of manure-based fertilizers. Make sure that those are old manure that, won't hurt you if you do that. Or buy a commercial fertilizer. I wouldn't use anything that's chemical-based personally. But there's a lot of good fertilizers on the market that are sterile. So I would use those.
And I would remember, too, that asparagus is going to be a large plant. I mean, it's going to be 3, 4, 5 feet tall of those asparagus leaves.
Yes.
So
it gets about 4 feet tall here. And it's also beautiful. And what my grandmother did with her asparagus is that she planted it all along her chain link fence that ran between her and her really good neighbor. And so it made this beautiful ferny foliage that's a great backdrop to the garden. And then she would let her neighbor take the spears from her side, and then my grandmother took the spears from her side. And they loved, but you got to make sure your neighbor doesn't mind that.
Right.
The point is, you need to put it somewhere that you don't mind looking at the foliage, because you're going to see it all summer long, and somewhere you don't mind not disturbing it. And you got to keep the grass out of it. And I'm trying to think if there's anything else to say about it. It is not hard to grow. I thought it was pretty easy.
it isn't. And so some people like the blanched asparagus. That's a whole nother shooting match.
Oh, you're talking about the ones that turn white.
Right. Those have been...
You have to cover them. That's a nightmare.
Yeah.
Don't even
Yeah.
go
I was
there.
just going to tell people that if you want blanched asparagus, just go to the fancy grocery store and buy it, because it is a pain in the butt to do yourself.
Plus, I'm not even sure it's as good for you because it's not green, but it is beautiful and it's very tender. I thought of something else, the asparagus beetle. Asparagus beetles will come. They will come. And so you can rub off their eggs on the stalks. I wouldn't eat those until they're cooked. And you can pick the beetles off and shake the beetles off and smash the beetles, if you're so inclined. I usually just rubbed off the eggs when I saw them.
Good idea. Do you have a picture of the asparagus egg so we can show people?
Gosh, no, I didn't take pictures of beetle eggs back when I did this. I just smashed them as quick as I could go. They're little tiny black dots that come out of the side of the asparagus.
All right. Very good. So let's move on to our quote. Our next quote. It is always a great pleasure and surprise when you happen on just the perfect place in which to plant some special treasure. Again, Margery Fish, because that's what's on the bookshelf. We Made a Garden by Margery Fish.
Yes, and we both have copies of it. I have 2 copies of it. Do you have an original copy? I bet you do.
You know what? I was meant to look because I don't have as good a catalog, but I'm almost positive that I only have this reprint edition that came out I think in the 90s.
I have that reprint edition, and I want to say I also have a really pretty reprint. And if I'm right, if it's that gardening book and that little threesome, I'll take a picture of it. But Margery Fish, we love her book. She started writing about her garden that she made with her husband. It's called We Made a Garden. In 1937. They were smart because they thought war was getting ready to happen. And they were so right. So they purchased a house and garden in the little village of Somerset.
Yes. And I love reading it because you're reading along about how they did certain things. And of course, her husband wanted things to be a certain way and very precise. And she was a little bit more loosey-goosey. And so you'll be reading along, and all of a sudden she'll refer to Walter, her husband, as my Lord and Master did not want me to, or whatever. And I just burst out laughing when I read that.
Yeah. I thought she was really witty. I was not a huge fan of Walter in the book. He's kind of irritating, especially when he's raking the gravel and making her rake the gravel. But, you know, he may have been the nicest, kindest little old man. Who knows?
And what I'm really impressed about is Margery did a lot of the work in the garden. I mean, during World War II especially, you could not find anybody to work in a garden, you know.
Nope.
And so I think she worked hours and hours out there and just did a lot of the physical labor herself, which I was impressed with, because every time you see a picture of Margery Fish, she's wearing a dress.
Like she's super fancy.
But she's not super fancy. She's so down to earth.
She must not be super fancy, because she was out there working her little tail feathers off. So there you go. I wonder what it is about gardens that makes people want to plant them when the world seems a mess.
Like now.
Yeah.
I saw on CBS Sunday Morning, they had a little episode about the number of vegetable plants there are people buying. And I think it was filmed out in California. And it almost looked like the interviewer and the guy from the garden center were in two different places when they were.
I think they were.
And so it was kind of interesting, but they were selling like hundreds of tomato plants a day out in California. So I'm kind of glad I started mine from seed a bunch, because I don't want to be a shortage.
Right. Well, speaking of that, I'm glad you brought that up, because I actually was kind of having a panic a couple of days ago, because I had only started 2 different tomatoes from seed, because my plan was to go up and buy tomatoes from the Tomato Man's daughter in Tulsa, which is what I like to do, because she has so many varieties. Let her start them instead of me, right?
Right.
But I was really terrified, because I thought, I can't find any tomatoes, and I can't really go to the nursery. So I thought we'd talk just a second about how nurseries are doing some special deals to help you out, because I went on her website, and you can order all your tomatoes and you can pay for them. And then you will just take your order up, show it through the window of your car, and they give you a special day and time to come get your tomatoes, and they load them for you, and they say bye-bye, and nobody talks to anybody.
And we are not yet buying tomatoes and pepper plants here, so people don't do that here until mid-May, but it's a similar situation. If you want something from the local greenhouse or the garden centers, you order in advance online, and they're setting up online sites, drive up and get it. And I know one thing is the churches have canceled all the orders for the Easter lilies and stuff, but the growers already grew them. And so
how sad.
There's a South Side guy here that has a greenhouse, and they're doing a drive-through thing, so you order online. And I thought, maybe I'll order a couple of Easter lilies for myself, and then they can be planted out in the garden. And it'll just sort of be just a reminder that this was an unbelievable year.
It was a really weird year. So if you want to order plants, you probably need to do it locally. It'll help your local business. I started looking online to try to find tomato plants and pepper plants and eggplant. And I'll be honest, there wasn't much out there. I did find 3 plants on Totally Tomatoes, and I ordered those because I wasn't sure yet that I could do them in Tulsa. But now I've done them in Tulsa. I've got an order there, and I also have an order at Bustani Plant Farm for some of my annuals and perennials, because he does more ornamental gardening and butterfly gardening. So I've got one for them too, and in their case, you just drive. I'm not exactly sure how that's going to work yet. They're still working it out, but my order's in. So order your stuff now, guys, from your local growers, if you're in Oklahoma and Texas and not as far north as Indiana.
Right. And our planting date in Indiana, we're closer to Mother's Day. And so there's a chance that things could be quieted down and we could go cautiously to the garden center. Nobody knows. But I know my little greenhouse will take care of me. I'm actually going to get some.
Right.
I'm going to ask them to get me some potting soil there, because I just feel a need to have spare bags of potting soil. I'm like, I'm running low on my stash. So,
well, I kind of feel that way too. I don't have all my pots planted yet, so I'm kind of concerned about that also.
Right. But anyway, the Margery Fish wrote this. We made a garden right before World War II, and as well, that's when they made the garden. The book actually came out much later, but it's a very fun read, and it got me thinking about all these other books we have about women in World War II, and many of them kept diaries during that time period.
Right.
And reading their diaries is always very fascinating to me. So this is our next quote. Ready?
I'm ready.
I am writing in the garden. To write as one should of a garden, one must write not outside it or merely somewhat near it, but in the garden.
I like
Frances Hodgson Burnett.
So what did she write that in? Was that quote in her book?
The Secret Garden?
Yeah, was it in there?
I don't think so. I think it's just a quote.
I think she was a gardener. We know
Yes.
that. And actually, she became more of a gardener after her life went to, I was going to say, down under. And I don't mean Australia.
Right.
I'm trying to keep it clean.
And so,
you know.
the Citizen Diarist. So I mentioned last week, I'm starting a little diary or writing something every day about this era. And I just am drawn to these World War II era diaries all over the place and seeking them out. And I found out why in the UK especially they had all these diaries.
Which some of them are now published because they were really, really good.
Right. I have one called, sitting right here. It's called Mrs. Miles's Diary, which is a woman named Constance Miles. And it's her diary from the war years. And it really is kind of, in some ways, it's very depressing. And you think, how did they get through something like that?
Right. How did they get through something like that when all of the men went to war and many of the women did too? But some people had to stay home and take care of the country. And people in Great Britain a lot of them had to move out to the country because the bombing was so bad in London.
In UK, they actually started a project in 1937 called Mass Observation, where they asked British citizens to record some of the mundane details of British life. And so that kind of morphed into these World War II diaries, which we are now privileged to be able to read.
Right.
And even here in Indiana, like our local historical society has encouraged people to write down things, for kids to write stories and just what's going on, because it's not all about toilet paper shortages, because they want to capture this history for future generations to look at. So they're asking people to keep records and diaries and their thoughts and put them down on paper, or even do an oral history.
Well, and it's always a good idea to keep somewhat of a diary for your garden and my blog works as a diary because often I'll write about what's going on in the garden along with some other thoughts. And the point about that is I can go back and look at that information and do a search and find out when I planted a certain plant or the name of a certain plant, because sometimes I can't remember the name. And so keeping some kind of diary is a good idea. I personally would keep one online, or at least on my computer so that I'd have that search function. But you could do it lots of different ways.
And I, obviously on my blog, I've had the Garden Bloggers Bloom Day for over a decade. Every 15th of the month, recording what's out there blooming. It's really been a great record so that you kind of know what to expect month by month. So
Exactly.
And I keep notes. I actually keep written notes in a journal, and I keep some quirky things, Dee.
Oh, imagine that.
And so I have a record of the first day that I've mowed, and it goes back to 2006. No.
That's because you're OCD about mowing.
No, it goes back to 2002, I think. So I know every day, the first day I've mowed.
Because she's OCD about mowing her yard.
I'm not OCD about it. I just like to do it.
Yeah, you are.
So
I've known you now for 12 years. Trust me. Okay, so one other thing I was going to ask you about this. I don't remember now. Oh, well, go ahead.
So
what else are we going to say?
We're just going to say be a citizen diarist, and if nothing else, keep a journal about your garden, because it's going to be fabulous this year.
And write a little bit about why you were working so hard. Like today, I'm going to go out and work in my garden and try to pull up all of this stupid liriope that decided to like hitchhike on another plant, and now I've got a section of it. So that's one of my jobs today is I'm going to go dig that up because there's nothing I can do about what's going on in the world. And so my vote is watch less TV, especially the news. Just watch enough, and then go out and do something that gives you pleasure.
And I'm going to go out and continue to edge my beds with a nice V-shaped cut.
Right, because you don't have Bermuda grass.
Nope.
Because in Oklahoma, we have that stupid Bermuda grass, and it wouldn't matter what kind of cut you make because it'll come snake its way in.
So anyway, we'll give people some writing prompts on our show notes so that if they're interested and don't know exactly what to write about their garden, we're going to write some writing prompts and they can go look at the show notes and see those. And then we'd love for people to show us some of the things they've written, maybe on the Garden Angelist Garden Club
That'd be awesome.
site on Facebook. So that's it today. Thank you for listening to the Garden Angelist. If you like our podcast, please tell your friends about us.
And if you listen on Apple Podcasts, we'd appreciate a 5-star review. That helps us get noticed by others. We also really appreciate Penn Live for giving us a shout out. Thank you so much.
Yes, and be sure and check out our show notes for links for more information about today's topics, those writing prompts I promised, and links to our own websites.
It was lovely to chat with all of you over the Garden Gate today. Bye until next week.
Bye.